My name's Matt Pratten. I'm the Senior Regional Analyst for Europe here at Intelligence Fusion, and on this episode of The Insight I'll be talking about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and its significance for the European continent. Nord Stream 2 is a natural gas pipeline the construction of it finished on 10th of September 2021. What it is a pipeline that parallels an existing Nord Stream pipeline that runs from the Leningrad region of Russia and goes via the Baltic Sea directly to the Greifswald in Germany. It's a pipeline that's intended to supply natural gas directly to Western Europe. Now, with Nord Stream 2, should that pipeline be completed, those two pipelines will be able to deliver up to 55 billion cubic metres per year of natural gas to Europe over two pipelines that stretch 1,224 kilometres. As for the sort of background of those pipelines, what makes it a bit of what sort of begins the significance of it is both the pipelines, the operators are Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 respectively, and both of these companies are based in Switzerland. However, the majority shareholders in both these pipeline operating companies, the majority shareholder is Gazprom, which is an oil and gas firm which is predominantly owned by the Russian government. Well, there's probably two broad considerations when it comes to the significance of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The first consideration is natural gas and its importance to Europe. Europe is heavily reliant on supply of natural gas. It's a form of energy which it needs in order to sustain its economies. Now, aside from the gas supplied from Russia, there's actually a number of gas fields and pipelines which already exist across Europe, but the business operating environment for oil and gas across Europe is oftentimes hampered by the vast regulatory environment that exists within the EU. So sourcing natural gas domestically can be a bit of a problem for a lot of firms based within Europe. And that's, of course, based on a lot of contextual reporting. But if you take a look at our platform, there's another factor as well which we come across quite often, and that is the actions of climate change activists. These are groups like Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for Future, and Greenpeace, and a litany of others. And these groups constantly campaign against oil and gas firms across Europe, be it protesting outside the headquarters or even conducting direct actions which include blocking natural gas terminals. One of the most recent ones was actually in the port in Valencia, where Greenpeace blocked access for ships to deliver natural gas onto the European continent there. Basically, the business operating environment for natural gas in Europe is it's a form of energy which is in high demand. It's essential it's an economic centre of gravity, but domestically it's very, very hard to operate in. So obtaining natural gas from Russia, on the other hand, is an attractive alternative. The second major consideration for natural gas in Europe is the supply of natural gas from Russia. Natural gas is one of Russia's top exports, and the infrastructure Russia has for supplying natural gas to Europe is actually quite extensive. Even without Nord Stream 2 at the moment, you've got several pipelines. You've got the existing Nord Stream pipeline running through the Baltic Sea. Then through overland routes through Eastern Europe, so these are the Yamal and the Brotherhood pipeline networks which run from Russia, go to Europe. These run through countries such as Moldova, Ukraine especially, Belarus, Poland, Romania, and a number of other former states that were part of the Soviet bloc. Now, in addition to those countries receiving natural gas via those pipelines, the pumping of natural gas through those countries into Europe, those countries receive quite a lot of money in transit fees, and for a lot of these governments, those transit fees are a vital source of revenue for them. And finally, further south, you have two pipelines going through the the Black Sea, the Turk Stream and the Blue Stream pipelines. So, even without Nord Stream 2 at the moment, Russia has what I can really describe as strategic depth in providing a form of energy which is in high demand and increasing demand across Europe for that matter, and is able to deliver that energy through what is already a very resilient network of pipelines. And with Nord Stream 2, should that become operational, that will add to that resilience. Well, should Nord Stream 2 become operational, and I suppose it's almost an inevitability. Now, as I alluded to before, Nord Stream 2 would on the surface provide an increased amount of resilience for Russia's oil and gas, natural gas supplies that would go to Europe. So on the surface, that sounds like a really good idea. However, with those pipelines being owned by the Russian government, it needs to be considered, the supply of natural gas needs to be considered in the context of how states wield power. There's a number of ways to explain this. Probably the most concise one I've come across is the DIME acronym, diplomatic, information, military and economic. And when it comes to Russia's activities in those spheres, of course, Russia has a long list of hostile and nefarious activities across towards Europe, especially, but also across the world. For diplomatic, for example, we constantly come across incidents of Russian diplomats being expelled, declared persona non grata, because of links to, because of allegations towards regarding espionage, and Russia does the same when it happens to their diplomats in Europe. If one of their diplomats gets, say, expelled from North Macedonia, the Russian government will expel the chargé d'affaires for North Macedonia and Moscow. In the information sphere, we constantly come across examples of Russia spreading disinformation or trying to create conditions that will cause divisions within countries. The most profound and recurring example I've come across of this is in Ukraine, where the Ukraine Security Service, the SBU, is constantly dismantling bot farms, which are designed to create divisions amongst the Ukrainian population. And with regards to that sort of spills over into the military aspect, as we've done in prior analysis in podcasts and reports. Russia continues to occupy the Donbass region and also Crimea of Ukraine, and in the context of that conflict, that Donbass region and Crimea, Russia occupying those pieces of terrain denies Ukraine access to its own vast natural gas and oil resources. In those three spheres, while Russia engages in a lot of hostile and nefarious activity, European countries and the US as well are able to engage in carry out activities which will counter those, for example, military sphere, constant supplies of training, weapons, etc. to the Ukrainian military. When it comes to information, there's always efforts to counter Russian disinformation. And in the diplomatic arena, well, sanctions and constantly expelling diplomats who are linked to espionage. The fourth part, though, the economic sphere, that's where things change a little bit. In the economic realm, well, Russia supplies natural gas, the majority of natural gas to Europe, and European countries, despite a lot of sanctions, they don't really have an effective means to counter that. So in the economic realm already, Russia has a very effective form of leverage, and should Nord Stream 2 become operational, that leverage is only going to increase, and that will create further problems for Europe. For example, there's already been cases where Russia has turned around to Eastern European countries and begun to threaten the natural gas supplies to those nations. The most recent and probably most profound example will be what it's been doing to Moldova very recently, with comments that President Putin made about Russia doesn't want to weaponize natural gas. Shortly after he made those comments, all of a sudden the supply of natural gas to Moldova is suddenly cut, and Gazprom starts demanding that Moldova pay outstanding bills to it. And there's been examples in Ukraine where Ukrainian firms have been alleging that supplies of natural gas to Russia from Russia have been cut. With Nord Stream 2 and its ability to double the supply, should it be approved, of natural gas directly to Western Europe, Russia will be able to essentially apply that same kind of tactic towards a lot of Western European nations, as it will, first of all, double the supply and satisfy some immediate demand. But with that ability, with that kind of product, though, Russia would be able to turn around to nearly any country across Europe and apply the same kind of I suppose, leverage or extortion, if you will, towards Europe, towards European countries. I mean, think of it as a way of, I suppose, a diplomatic racketeering. Say, for example, down the track, Russia wants to have a lot of restrictions, a lot of sanctions removed. Should a lot of European nations suddenly decide, no, we're not going to do that, his effective counter can be, well, pardon the pop culture reference, but he could easily say, that's a very nice natural gas supply you have there. It'd be a bit of a shame if anything were to happen to it. So that's pretty much what the significance of Nord Stream 2 would be. It's on the surface, it appears to be a way to further solidify the resilience of natural gas supplies to Europe, which it needs. On the other hand, doing so will enable Russia to apply a lot more leverage than it already does to European countries.